The boardroom at Voss Global was suffocatingly quiet. Every executive sat rigid, eyes glued to the polished table. At the head stood Clara Voss, the 29-year-old billionaire CEO, who dropped a thick stack of reports onto the wood with a thud that made hearts skip. "If nobody in this room has the guts to speak," she said, voice low and lethal, "I'll replace every last one of you." Not a soul breathed. In the corner, a man in a faded Navy maintenance jumpsuit wiped the far end of the table. His hands were rough, scarred from years of real work, but they moved with calm precision. He paused, rag in hand, and looked straight at her. "Then maybe," he said, quiet enough that the room had to strain to hear, yet every syllable landed like a hammer, "you should start by finding your own humanity." The air turned to ice. Jack Rowan was 41. To the suited elite who strode past him daily, he was invisible, just another guy who emptied trash cans and fixed flickering fluorescents. Same uniform, same routine, same silence. But Jack hadn't always been a ghost. 10 years earlier, he'd been Master Sergeant Rowan, U.S. Air Force, designing avionics that brought rescue choppers home through storms. He'd had a wife, Sarah, who laughed like sunlight, and a little girl, Ella, who thought her dad could fix anything. Then cancer took Sarah in 90 brutal days. Jack left the service, took any job with hours that let him be there when Ella's school bus rolled up, and learned how fast a man can disappear when the world stops needing him. Now Ella was 10, fierce and gentle all at once, and her smile was the only wage that still mattered. Everyone at Voss Global whispered about Clara Voss, the ice queen who'd built a logistics empire before most people figured out mortgages. She never raised her voice. She didn't need to. A single sentence from her could end careers. Last week she'd looked a senior VP in the eye and said, "Your mediocrity is tedious," and 20 minutes later security escorted him out with a cardboard box. Jack kept his head down. He needed the paycheck for Ella's inhalers, her tuition, the rent on the two-bedroom that smelled faintly of mildew. Getting noticed by Clara Voss was the last thing he could afford. Still, clipped to his belt was a small silver keychain, tiny pilot wings. A leftover from a life when he believed he could save people. That morning his supervisor had tapped him on the shoulder. "Conference room A. Big meeting. Just stay quiet. Stay invisible. Clara Voss will be there." Jack had nodded. He'd cleaned during executive meetings before. But when he wheeled his cart past the glass walls and saw 20 terrified faces, something in his chest tightened. He slipped inside, started at the far end. Clara never glanced his way. 5 minutes in, the slaughter began. She shredded the Q3 projections, voice calm, words surgical. One woman's lip trembled. A man stared at the table like it might open and swallow him. Jack kept wiping. He'd seen this play before, drill instructors who thought fear forged better soldiers. It never did. Clara's gaze snapped to him. "Clean faster," she said, "or at least pretend you're useful." Something ancient and exhausted inside Jack simply stopped. He set the rag down, stood straight, met her eyes. The room forgot how to breathe. "Ma'am," he said, voice steady as a compass, "I look useful enough to spot someone using other people's dignity as a shield for their own pain." A pen hit the table and rolled. No one retrieved it. Clara rose slowly. "Excuse me? You heard me. So did they." He tipped his chin toward the frozen executives. "You can fire me. Won't be the worst thing life's done. But you're breaking good people every day just so you can feel tall. And that's not power. That's just lonely." Her knuckles went white on the table's edge. "You're done here." Jack nodded once. "Yes, ma'am. But truth doesn't clock out when you do." He picked up his supplies. At the door he paused. Real strength isn't kicking people when they're down. It's reaching down and pulling them back up after the world already tried to bury them. You ought to try it. The door clicked shut behind him. 10 seconds of dead silence. Then a single pair of hands began to clap, slow, deliberate. David Chun, junior strategist, the last guy Clara had publicly eviscerated. One by one, Others joined until half the room was applauding a janitor who just torched his livelihood for them. Clara stared like she'd been slapped, then stormed out. Someone had recorded it, security cameras plus Priya from IT who'd had enough. By noon the clip was all over internal channels. By nightfall it had escaped into the wild. Janitor school's billionaire tyrant. 8 million views in 24 hours. The board called Clara in. They couldn't fire her, she owned controlling shares, but they could sideline her. Take a leave. Fix your image or we will. She left through the garage, sat in her Bentley, and for the first time in 10 years felt something sharper than rage. Shame. Meanwhile, Jack cleaned out his locker, collected his last check, and picked Ella up from school. How was work, Dad? He smiled, ruffling her hair. One for the history books, kiddo. 3 days later, Clara sat alone in her 43rd floor penthouse, city lights glittering like broken glass below. Her phone wouldn't stop. She ignored it and opened the video instead. She watched herself through 5 million strangers' eyes and finally heard her father's voice again. Take care of your crew, Clara. She found Jack 2 days after that. Riverside Elementary, after hours. He was mopping the cafeteria when she walked in wearing jeans and no armor. He looked up, unsurprised. Miss Voss. She held out her closed fist, opened it. The little silver wings sat in her palm. You left this. You tracked me down for a keychain? No, she said, voice cracking like thin ice. I tracked you down because you were right. And I needed to know how you stayed decent. After everything. Jack studied her for a long moment, then sat on a lunch bench. After a beat, she sat opposite, a billionaire and a janitor separated by a table that had seen a million spilled milks. My wife died, he said simply. I was angry for years. Almost let it turn me into someone she'd hate. Then one night Ella asked if I was mad because she wasn't enough. 6 years old. His voice roughened. I decided grief doesn't get to win twice. Clara's eyes filled. My dad was Air Force. Died in a training crash when I was 16. I thought if I made everything perfect, no one else I loved would ever die. Turns out I just made everyone miserable. Jack slid the wings across the table. My wife gave me those the day I enlisted. Said they were to remind me I was meant to lift people, not knock them down. He met her gaze. Think you need the reminder worse than I do right now. She stared at the tiny wings like they might burn her. I don't know how to come back from this. You already started, he said. You showed up. You said sorry. That's step 1. He stood, picked up his mop. Loss doesn't have to be the end of your kindness, Miss Voss. It can be the beginning of someone else's hope. Your dad's legacy isn't the anger. It's whatever you do next. He walked away. Clara sat alone under fluorescent lights, holding $5 worth of silver that suddenly weighed more than her entire empire. 1 month later, she walked back into Voss Global, not as the Ice Queen, but as someone new. The auditorium was packed. She took the stage with no notes. I owe you an apology, she began, voice steady. I confused fear with respect and cruelty with strength. I was wrong, and I hurt you. She clicked the remote. A logo appeared, silver wings cradling a heart. This is the Voss Human Project. 50 million of my own money to start. Childcare, mental health, tuition help, emergency grants, whatever our people need when life hits hard. Gasps. Then applause, tentative at first, then roaring. She gestured to the wing doors. The man helping me lead it just walked in. Jack stepped onto the stage in a plain button-down, looking like he'd rather face insurgents than a microphone. The room erupted anyway. He cleared his throat. I'm no speaker, but I know what it's like to choose between groceries and an inhaler. I know what it feels like to be invisible. Somebody saw me eventually. He glanced at Clara, and that changed everything. Later, employees lined up just to shake his hand, to thank her, to cry a little. In her office, afterward, Ella hugged her dad hard. Mom would be proud. Across the room, Clara watched, thumb rubbing the little silver wings she now kept in her pocket every single day. 1 year on, the Voss Human Project had kept 300 families afloat. Jack ran community outreach. Clara still terrified Wall Street, but inside her own building people smiled when she walked past. And every September, on the anniversary of the 2 deaths that had almost destroyed them both, they met at dusk in the park beside Riverside Elementary. Hundreds gathered, employees, neighbors, kids, each holding a paper lantern. Jack spoke first. "We're here to remember. But mostly we're here to prove they were right about us." Ella released her lantern, a photo of Sarah glowing inside. Clara released hers next, her father grinning in his flight suit. One by one the lanterns rose, until the sky was full of soft gold stars climbing into the dark. Ella slipped her hand into Jack's. Clara stood on his other side, eyes shining. Quietly, so only he could hear, she whispered, "Thank you." Jack looked up at all that light and answered just as quietly, "Some things don't need saying, ma'am. They just need doing." And somewhere above them, 2 people who never got to see the ending smiled anyway, because the people they'd loved most had finally learned how to fly together.